Tamima, and this is a Real Talk. Tonight, we raise awareness on a rare and medical condition, hemophilia. My guests will be sharing their stories of how they have managed this disease. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. I'd like to introduce my first guest, Anthony Odek, 25 years old. He's a lawyer, and for him, hemophilia has been a disease that he has lived with his entire life. So, Anthony, maybe tell us about when were you diagnosed at first?
Well, I was first diagnosed when I was 3 months old. When they cut my umbilical cord, it overbled, and it couldn't stop bleeding for 3 weeks. So the doctors were worried what was going on. So they did a diagnosis test, and that's when they found out that I have hemophilia type A, severe. So
how did that affect you growing up, obviously, as a young boy?
Well, for me, specifically, I really loved soccer. And when I was younger, I was aware that I have a condition. I really did not have the degree of severity of what I had. So I usually was oblivious to the fact that I had this condition, and I never let it limit me in the number of activities that I would partake in. So I would play soccer, a lot of soccer, which actually led to the deterioration of my joints.
Would your parents be aware that you're playing soccer?
They were aware, and they couldn't stop me because I loved it. And I would regularly get admitted to hospital. When I was a child, I would get to the hospital, and the doctor would tell me, you need to stop playing or you will never walk again. But as a child, you can't, I had to play. So it never really limited me, but at the same time, it had a very diverse effect on my joints. Yeah.
So at what point did you now have to heed what the doctor was telling you all along?
Well, now it got to a point, this was after primary school. In high school, my joints became really, really bad because when I would get major swellings on both knees, and this would limit my ability to walk, to even run. And it started now hitting me hard that I cannot continue playing soccer. So I would be admitted for a month, 2 months, I'm in hospital. So it now started dawning on me that I have to stop playing. So it was really hard dealing with it because I loved soccer. I was in a football team, both in school and at home. So it was a really tough time, but I had to stop because the thought of being disabled is what led me to now have to just heed to what the doctor said. Yeah.
What's the most severe injury you've ever had as a result of your condition?
Well, I've ever had a head injury, which was at the back of my head. We were playing hide and seek when kids. My leg got into a hole, and I hit the back of my head, and I bled profusely. And that time, the kids did not know what was happening, and my parents weren't around. So, and head injuries, according to most hemophiliacs, that's usually the worst because the rest can be managed. But a head injury, you never know whether it's going to affect the brain or what degree has it affected the skull or not. But that one hadn't really gotten into the skull, but it was really severe.
Okay. Yeah. Right now, I want to introduce Dr. Charles Ngari. He's a pathologist at Lancet, Kenya. Welcome to the show, Dr. Charles.
Thank you.
I want you to perhaps just put into focus for our home audience, what is this disease?
Thank you. Hemophilia is a disease characterized by uncontrolled bleeding. So generally, when you get a trivial injury, you're meant to stop bleeding. But with hemophiliacs, they just continue bleeding. Usually the bleeding would depend on the severity of the hemophilia, as Anthony has mentioned. And there are generally two types of hemophilias. You have hemophilia A and hemophilia B. And when you have, so the hemophilia would be dependent on what you're lacking in your system to help your body clot. And those substances are called factors, of which hemophilia A lack factor 8, while hemophilia B lack factor 9. And the treatment of these two conditions are different, but how they present is quite similar. as Anthony has mentioned, you'd get bleeding into the joints. In other cases, you get bleeding into the skin or the mucous tissue, mucous membranes, and this can manifest also in ladies as heavy menstrual bleeding.
So it affects both men and women?
The hemophilias would affect both men and women, but the women would be more of carriers, while men actually suffer the severe disease. But still, you could get the rare cases where the women suffer the rare disease and would present with the bleeding, as Anthony has mentioned, into the joints.
So its causes are genetic, whereby it's passed from the mother to the child?
Yes, so most hemophilias are genetically inherited, whereby you'd have a first-line relative similarly having a similar condition. However, there are the rare cases which we call a spontaneous inheritance kind of pattern, whereby no one in the family has had this problem, and suddenly there's a child with a hemophilia.
Maybe let's find out from you, Anthony. Is there anyone else in your family who has hemophilia?
So far, after investigating the family history, I'm the first one to have it. Though we were suspecting that my grandfather must have had it, because my grandmother was explaining to us that he would be in a state of immobility. He couldn't walk. And you know, she didn't go to school, so she couldn't explain it in scientific terms as the doctor has explained, or even in a layman's way, but so that you can get that it's actually hemophilia. But we suspect that it probably would, because he died when my dad was still young.
So it was probably because of the times then and the lack of access to medical care. Yes. It went undetected.
It went undetected.
And undiagnosed.
Exactly.
I'll introduce my next guest, Maureen Oduor, who is also living with this condition. Maureen, welcome to the show. So earlier on, Daktari told us that it's actually, hemophilia usually demonstrates in males more than females, but you're a female who's actually living with this condition.
I'm a female living with von Willebrand's disorder of blood. It's also part of hemophilia, and I lack both the von Willebrand's that help the blood clots and also factor VIII.
Okay, maybe let me just introduce our resident experts tonight. I also have with me Dr. Julia Muthua, who is a resident pathologist at the University of Nairobi. So Dr. Julia is just going to put into perspective for us what the difference is between these two types of hemophilia.
Okay, thank you very much. The difference between von Willebrand disease and hemophilia is that for von Willebrand disease, what actually lacks is the von Willebrand factor. And what von Willebrand factor does, it's their neighbors. They work hand in hand with factor VIII levels. So when you lack von Willebrand factor, the relationship between von Willebrand and factor VIII is affected. So you also tend to have low factor VIII levels. For hemophilia A, as he said he had, what is actually missing is the factor VIII alone. The von Willebrand factor they have, but factor VIII is what is actually missing. So that is how the two are related and how they're different.
Yes. So maybe if I had to ask you, Maureen, as a woman, what's the hardest part about living with this condition?
It has been a long journey. Since at first I used to have only nosebleeds that affect me much until I was admitted for around 2 months when I lost consciousness and I was not yet still diagnosed.
At what age were you now properly diagnosed and you were told you're actually suffering from this condition?
2007.
How old were you then?
By then I was around 16 years old.
So for your early childhood, had you had any medical issues? Were you constantly sick? How did it go undetected for so long?
I used to get nosebleeds, but as you know, people, they will say that the myths and misconceptions. They will say that this family is bewitched, since I used to nosebleed and my brother also nosebleeds.
So your brother also had the same condition?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were admitted at the same time in the hospital. He took longer in the ward, and me at least 2 months, and then I got out of the ward. So at that time is when we were diagnosed.
At 16 years old?
Yeah.
So in which other ways did it affect you as a woman?
Currently, the major occasion that I had is when I was pregnant with my first child. In fact, I took long to get pregnant because I used to fear. So that is when, during the pregnancy, I used to get bleeds, majorly like menses. I would wonder, what is this? I thought when you're pregnant, I could get that different thing because my menses are always heavy.
You're not supposed to bleed. Yeah. Actually, it's actually a sign of something not being right.
Right. Yeah.
So how were the doctors then able to manage that?
Sometimes I used to go, I get factor to control it. Sometimes I just take tranexamic acid to control the bleeding. So
yours was definitely a high-risk pregnancy.
Yeah.
And what happened now the day that you were giving birth? Because I can imagine that as nature demands, when a woman is giving birth, it can be a very bloody affair.
Yeah. Majorly, when I was nearly delivering, I didn't reach my time for delivery. So when I went to Kenyatta because I was bleeding, is when they found out that I could not continue carrying the pregnancy. So immediately, they told me that I was to deliver because I woke up and I was told my baby is weighing this, we have to control the bleeding, your baby is okay, you are also now okay.
Maybe let me ask Dr. Julie about this because even she's like, I woke up and there was a baby there. I know I didn't give birth normally, so maybe just put that into perspective for us.
Okay. For her case, what she's talking about, it sounds like she was induced into labor because of the recurrent bleeds that she's undergoing. So maybe that's why she can't remember.
So it was an elective CS?
No. She's not talking about a cesarean section. She's actually talking that most probably it was a normal delivery, but that which was induced. And unless I get the total history, most probably it was assisted labor, but not through cesarean section.
Because you were unconscious
yes.
the entire time?
Yeah, I was unconscious. Just the way she has said it, it was assisted labor because I had like 4 nurses around me, 2 doctors, but not, I was told that I delivered normal, but not through elective. Yeah.
So since earlier on, Dr. Charles mentioned that the condition is actually passed on genetically. Does your child have the condition as well?
No, he was diagnosed that he doesn't have any form of bleed.
Was it, when you took him for the test just to find out, was it a scary experience for you?
Yeah, I was thinking that he would have, but I thank God when they told me that he's okay. Yeah, okay. Unless he develops something else when he's growing, but I don't think so.
Okay, maybe Dr. Charles, maybe you can just also paint the picture for us. What is the major difference between a man living with this condition and a woman living with this condition?
All right, thank you. So the considerations that we make between men and women should first start with the severity of the disease. That we don't just diagnose as a hemophiliac and leave it at that. We decide how severe the disease is. With mild disease, most times the bleeding is not major unless a major traumatic event happens, of which now would manage the trauma itself, not determined whether they're male or female. When it comes to moderate disease, also it depends on what is causing the bleeding. But in ladies, the regular periods would now be of concern. That now when they get their regular periods, it would last for no more than the 3 or 4 days that we expect the bleeding to be occurring. And so for the moderate cases during the menstrual periods, we try to control and see if they would need medication during that time. As for the severe disease, is when now we take much more precautions. They would get regular factors, both men and women, whether it's monthly injections or when they get any traumatic event, they'll be given the concentrates. And in women now would advise them when it comes to special considerations like during pregnancy, as was mentioned, they need to be followed up strictly by a hematologist, who is a doctor who's specialized in diseases of the blood, and a gynecologist who understands the condition that she's living with.
Still more to come here on Real Talk. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Real Talk. Remember, tonight's topic is rare and expensive medical conditions. So far, we've talked about hemophilia. We are just raising awareness so that you and I can be more, we can be more compassionate towards people who are living with these conditions, understand them better, and also at the same time, just create more awareness so that if the government can do something, because obviously with hemophilia, as you're about to find out, there is a huge medical cost that comes with managing this disease. Right now, I want to introduce my next guest. I have Carlos Maube, who is 29, and James Kagwi, 35, who are both living with hemophilia. Maybe let me start with you, James. For how long have you been living with hemophilia?
Thank you, Tamima, for inviting us to this show. My name is James. I am 35 years old. I was diagnosed to have hemophilia when I was only 1 year old.
Wow.
Like many hemophilia patients, at that point, diagnosis was very, it wasn't there, actually, I would say that. And unfortunately for me, I was living with my grandmother in my village in Moranga, in Kigumo. So every time I would get an injury, I would probably be taken to the local dispensary and I would get infused or injected like the normal, any other normal patient. Until when I was barely 1 year, when I started crawling, I would bleed a lot from my ankles and knees and especially my wrists and my elbows. So then when I started teething, when teeth are coming out, I would bleed a lot from the gums. So my mom by then was working in Mombasa, and so there was this concern. He's always bleeding. My neighbors are, starting to stigmatize the family. They're saying, I think that boy is cursed or something. And at some point, they decided, let us take him to Kenyatta National Hospital. Luckily, there was a hematologist then who was called Professor Kasili. That must have been in 1985 thereabout, or 84 thereabout. So I was diagnosed to have hemophilia. The only challenge then was that the management of hemophilia then was you could only be infused with whole blood. So it meant every time I had an injury, say for example I was crawling, I have a knee bleed, we had to get my relatives to come and donate blood for me to be infused. So that
was the treatment?
That was the treatment at that point. Fortunately, in a couple of years, technology improved. I therefore didn't need to get the whole blood. Now you can imagine when you have to get the whole blood, it means you have to be admitted because you have to be, the infusion of blood takes long. It's like a drop almost every minute. So you have to be admitted. So the cost of admissions were also very high. Fortunately for us, when technology improved, I didn't require the entire whole blood. I only required the factor 8 in the blood. So I started getting fresh frozen plasma. And that was in the late 80s now. But still, the cost of admissions, because every now and then, in a week, I probably get one bleed. Currently, we are fortunate that we normally get now factor concentrates, which my earlier colleagues, Tony mentioned. We get factor concentrates. They are very expensive to buy because on a single incident, say for example, when I have just a simple knee bleed, I may be infused up to 3 days in a week. One single infusion will cost you around 50,000. That means in every 3 days of infusion, I'll have to pay around 150,000.
Which is very expensive for the average Kenyan.
For average Kenyan, I think it would be on the extreme end. Luckily for us, we don't get to buy the medicine because then we partnered with the World Federation of Hemophilia, who donates the factor to us. But it's a condition that requires you to literally be out of your normal environment because as a parent, you'll always be rushing your kid to hospital. So you can imagine if you're employed, you have to keep telling your boss that I have to take a day off and take my child to hospital. If you're a kid in school, you have a knee bleed, you cannot even walk. So, and it will last, your normal knee bleed will probably take you 2 days at most.
For you, a knee bleed is not really a knee bleed. It's major than that.
For us, what for you would say it's a knee bleed is probably when you've fallen down, you've hit your knee badly, but you'll still be able to limp here and there. For us, it totally immobilizes you. You can't actually walk.
And it could be catastrophic if not treated early.
Exactly. For a knee bleed may not kill you, but now it depends with where, again, the injury has come in.
Right.
So there are those bleeds that when we notice somebody has, then we quickly try to intervene, especially bleeds in the head, abdominal bleeds, and anything that is closer to your heart.
Okay. Before we come to Carlos, I just want to talk to Dr. Charles and Julia here. He mentioned that treatment is free. Is that the case right now in public hospitals? If somebody had hemophilia, do they get the treatment at no cost, or is it subsidized?
As James mentioned, the treatment for hemophilia, you either give whole blood that has just been collected from the donor before the factor deteriorates, or you could give the portion of the blood which has the factor which is concentrated in it, or you could have synthetic factors being infused. So for the whole blood, it would depend on the availability of the blood, and there are some costs that would come to it being processed, but the blood itself is free. For the concentrate of the factors that are derived from the blood, would need a specialized facility that actually makes this concentrate, and not all public hospitals would have that facility with them. As for the synthetic factors, you'd need the coordination between the hospital and the Haemophilia Association to provide the factors. And most times, if it's coming directly from the Haemophilia Association, it would be free or at a highly subsidized cost. However, if you're getting it from a private hospital, you'd have to pay the full amount, which, as James mentioned, would be about 50,000 per infusion.
So basically what I'm hearing here is that if there is a family that is suffering through this, it's to their advantage if they join the association. Because from the association, then they're able to get such benefits of getting the treatment either at a very subsidized cost or where possible even at no cost, and also the opportunity for the support group as well.
Yes.
So Carlos, are you a member of the organization?
Yeah, fully, 100%.
So when were you diagnosed?
At the age of 17 years is when I was recognized to be hemophilic, and that was after misdiagnosed from the hospital where they suggested that I had ulcers in my stomach, so they had to do a major operation.
So it's something you had lived with for your entire life, basically, but nobody had quite diagnosed it for what it really was.
Yes. Even after the number of episodes of bleeds that I used to have, no one actually figured out that this could be hemophilia. So after the major operation is when actually it gave a shock to the doctors, because I was totally infused a lot of units in my body, almost 30
That's
times.
during the surgery. When you're on the table, you're open, and they're realizing that for some reason they can't stop the bleeding.
Yes. So actually after the operation, I was taken back to the ward. But being in the ward is when the transfusion of blood was taking place. After some few days is when one of the parents who had a boy with hemophilia actually passed by the hospital and said, no, this is something that needs to be checked into it. So he suggested it to a nurse, and then later the nurse proceeded to the doctor. So they had to take my blood sample for test. So then when the results came back is when I was diagnosed to be hemophilia type B.
Now, I want to ask Dr. Julia, because for me it's quite alarming that even then, it was not the medical fraternity. It took a parent who had a child with hemophilia to actually suggest to a nurse that, hey, maybe you need to confirm if it's this or that. So what does that say about our healthcare system in the country?
Okay, truly, it's unfortunate that sometimes it takes a bit long for us as healthcare workers to actually identify hemophilia, and not just hemophilia, the other rare bleeding disorders. like von Willebrand disease. For James, he was fortunate enough, he was taken straight to Kenyatta, and those were the a bit early days when at a younger age, and with him having to crawl, that is a very minor trauma. So with minor trauma, it raises your ability to, it raises your suspicion that there's something else behind the bleed. Now for Carlos, he's been having bleeds, or rather knee swelling. They'll actually tell you, you actually don't see blood. For knee swelling, you actually just get swelling of the knee. But yet it is a bleed inside. So that can get misdiagnosed as maybe septic arthritis. It can get misdiagnosed as arthritis, juvenile arthritis. So with that, it makes them continue going to hospitals on and off, until now when he actually gets a major bleed, like what he underwent into surgery, then the bleed is not stopping, so you're wondering what's happening. And a lot of the patients I've actually seen, many a times it's actually the relatives who actually raise it, because again, we have 600 patients with hemophilia, and you can imagine we are 30 million. For hemophilia, because they tend to get deep bleeds into the muscles, into the joints, they actually don't get, like Moline was talking about, the nose bleeding, the problematic menses. For them, it's more swellings. So for swelling, you're at the back of your mind, you're not thinking about of a bleed. Yeah. You actually, in fact, most of the time, it doesn't hit you, it's a bleed.
Most guys will think, amegongwa.
Yes, exactly. It's a swelling. Yeah. Because all of us, when we fall down, we swell after an injury. But for them, it's more of the bleeding has not yet stopped. So that is why it's a bit, it gets a bit tricky, unless now you actually have a relative who's actually had hemophilia. You've been around them. So that's why actually even through the study I've done, I've actually realized that there is a problem with the diagnosis, and it is unfortunate. And it's really because it's also a very rare condition.
So when it comes to diagnosis, is there a test that people can take, and from that test immediately you can tell whether somebody is carrying the gene?
Okay, for the test for actual diagnosis, the first thing we start with is what we call a coagulation profile, which is more of a screening. So for people with hemophilia, the coagulation profile will be abnormal. Once the coagulation profile is abnormal, it raises suspicions on our side, and we say, why is there a prolonged abnormality in one of the tests that we actually carry out.
Is this test an expensive test?
In Kenyatta, no, it's not really an expensive test, but the unfortunate thing is that the reagents that we use actually get out of stock very quickly, because it's one of those rare things that we don't really do on a routine basis. We only get to do coagulation profiles when we are thinking there is a bleeding disorder. And then again, we've already said
it's rare.
It's already rare. Hemophilia is already rare. So getting that, getting a clinician to actually ask for a coagulation profile also takes a bit longer.
So because the supply is low because it's a rare disease, basically.
Yes.
So if I had to ask, when it comes to treatment and management, is this something that your normal health insurance covers?
I think, first, I'll also want to add on to what Dr. has talked about. Diagnosis for us is a very big challenge. So what we've done as Kenya Haemophilia Association is then to try and bridge that gap. And because we cannot do it, in the entire country, what we've done is we've tried to start or to establish what we're calling hemophilia comprehensive care centers or hemophilia treatment centers in at least the major referral hospitals. Currently, we've managed to open 4 centers. We have 2 centers, one in Kenyatta National Hospital and one in MTRH.
That deals specifically with blood diseases.
Yes. And what happens is we have also equipped them with the diagnosis machines. Because one of the challenges she's talking about, yes, reagents may be a challenge, but also even the capacity in terms of do they have the machines. Most of the facilities outside Nairobi may not have the machines or the capability. Then two, we have a bigger challenge with the personnel. Lab techs were trained, but none of them has ever encountered or gotten the ability to do a coagulation profile.
Right.
So one of the things that we're doing as Kenya Hemophilia Association, like now in Coast General Hospital, we've already established a clinic. We have a hemophilia treatment center. Then we have also equipped them with a machine to do the diagnosis, and then train the personnel within that facility to be able to do that. So the patients within the coast region don't have to come all the way to Nairobi. Previously, somebody like Carlos had to travel all the way for a diagnosis to be done in Nairobi, just to identify that he has hemophilia and what type of hemophilia he has. We recently opened a center, last month actually, in Moranga. So we are now in the process of capacity building them in terms of diagnosis. Then we are hoping to scale it up to other regions. We still haven't gotten to that point. But yes, the challenge is not only in the treatment itself, but also in the ability to diagnose, because now treatment follows diagnosis. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So remember, we are raising awareness on this tonight. You can join the conversation via the hashtag #RealTalkWithTamima on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. Right now, we'll be taking a very quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Real Talk. Remember, tonight we are raising awareness on rare and expensive medical conditions. So far, we've tackled hemophilia. And earlier on, I was talking to James and Carlos. So during the break, I was just asking the both of them whether they have any kids. And James, you mentioned that you have kids. Yes. Me as a hemophilia patient, my son definitely would not have hemophilia, because hemophilia is moved within the X chromosome. So women tend to have 2, men have only 1. So mine, the X is the one that is affected. And that's why you find in most cases it does not affect ladies because they have 2. So if one is affected, the other one will complement the other one. So for me, I know, because the X will come from the lady, my son will not have. So, but luckily, or fortunately, I was not praying for a son. I've always been praying for girls. That motivates me even more, because then I know their sons, if they take the X chromosome from the mother.
If the mother is a carrier?
Actually, you see, my daughters will definitely become carriers.
Yes.
Because my X chromosome is affected.
Exactly.
So that means their sons
may have it.
If they pick the X that has an issue, then they may be hemophilic. So that is for me the biggest motivator, to work harder, so that the next generation, my grandson, can come and visit me and tell me, Dad, Uka, because of what you did, I actually live a comfortable life. Yes. That's my only motivation.
Okay. So right now I introduce Patricia Kurani. So Patricia is also living with a rare and expensive medical condition, has its hereditary angioedema. Patricia, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So maybe tell us about your condition.
So hereditary angioedema is inherited rare condition that is normally characterized by excessive, massive swellings in the body, internally or externally. Yeah, and it is normally caused by deficiencies in a certain protein called C1 esterase, which, if it's not enough in the body or it's excessive, it can cause these excessive, prolonged swellings. Yeah.
So with the angioedema, the swellings are demonstrated almost similarly to the same way they demonstrate in hemophilia.
Well, in the case of hereditary angioedema, the swellings are more of progressive swellings. For example, you can start swelling in this part of the hand, and it just progresses to your entire hand, or to maybe towards your throat, and it started from one local point. So I think in that way, it's a bit different from hemophilia.
Because there is no bleeding here.
Yeah, there's no bleeding here. It's actually leaking of fluids from the body cells, excessive leakage of fluid. So that is a bit different from the hemophilia group. So ours, it's more of excessive swellings which last for about 4 or 5 days. So it's not your normal being hit by something and you swell a little bit and it goes down. Ours prolongs for a long period of time.
So how has that affected your life?
It has a lot of setbacks, especially the fact that it's a childhood condition, whereby as a child, you know, you're normally playful, and which I used to be. I was a tomboy back then, and I was very athletic. I loved to run, I loved to swim. But when you consider the fact that the condition is triggered by physical trauma, then my activities had to be reduced down a whole notch. As much as I would want to do physical activities, I would find myself a bit hindered because my hands would either swell. If just even washing normal clothes, your hands swell. If, for example, taking long walks, the feet swell. So those are things which with time, as a child, the symptoms are not so severe, but when you reach your teenage stage, then it becomes more and more severe.
As a woman, does this also affect you when you're pregnant?
Yes, it does, because it's one of the triggers is hormonal imbalance, like even your menses and everything. So it does affect pregnant women. At times you can find that some women they get more swellings when they're pregnant. And at other times it's the opposite. Some women don't actually get any sort of swelling. So I think the condition is like person specific. It manifests differently in different patients who have HAE, yes.
Okay. So let me also introduce Charles Kibe, who has also been living with hemophilia his entire life. Charles, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
So maybe tell us, because your case is a bit different. So far we've spoken about how hemophilia can affect women, especially when it comes to those things that, thanks to biology, only women can undergo.
Yeah.
But for you, your experience is a bit different, because when you're going through the initiation, you had a bit of an ordeal with that. Maybe just share that with us.
Yeah, thank you. The time came when I was to be circumcised, and I knew from the background that I am hemophilic. So I decided to go to hospital and find out how that will be done, because I was fearing about going the normal process was used to be. They advised me about using vitamins, supplements, and the process got well. But at the night, the bleed continued. The bleed started and I breathed almost an hour before we decided to go back to hospital. Then I was taken to hospital. They tried using the fresh blood, but still the blood will come out until I was taken back to KNH. That's where the bleeding was managed.
So what for other people was a very, simple rite of passage, for you almost turned deadly.
Yeah. In fact, I used, it's go for 2 weeks also.
So will you bleed wiki mbili?
No, the normal person go for just 1 week to 2 weeks.
So it took you 3 months to properly heal?
Yeah.
And in those 3 months, were you hospitalized the entire time?
Yeah, I was hospitalized at KNH Kenyatta.
And maybe let me ask Daktari, maybe just bring that into perspective for us. Because, kuna zile vitu vidogo vidogo, pengine you might not think much of them, but that's when you realize how what you take for granted actually affects somebody else's life.
Okay, it's very true. Actually, for hemophilia, we actually advise them to actually come to hospital and be circumcised in hospital. Actually, we prepare them. Currently, we have a program together with the Kenya Haemophilia Association whereby the circumcision is actually done in Kenyatta, and only when we have the factor 8 concentrates with us. So technically, we are supposed to, what happens is that we bring them in. We do for them what I had told you about the coagulation profile, to see the baseline. Then we give them factor concentrates. Then we redo those tests again to check, to ensure that now they've gone back to normal. Then now we circumcise and we continue giving them factor 8 concentrates. The other thing about bleeding, or rather what we call the coagulation system, it works also hand in hand with the healing system. So for healing and repair, you also need a good coagulation system. So if the coagulation system is not working, then healing and repair takes even longer. So you continue bleeding. Healing also takes longer to occur. So as he had said, usually for the normal male patient who has no bleeding disorder, the healing process takes 2 weeks. And the bleeding actually takes like 2 days, and it actually should stop the day 1. Then we control the other factors for healing. Now for a hemophilia, they will continue bleeding. If you continue bleeding, that is delaying healing. Yeah. So that's why he says he continued bleeding for more than 2 days. They noticed this is too much, so he was brought to hospital, and we controlled the bleeding, but now the healing takes longer. Because again, as I said, healing and repair also needs the coagulation system.
So now the clotting.
Yes, the clotting.
So maybe let me come back to you, James, because I'm sure for a lot of our viewers who are watching, ideally, there might be somebody out there who, just from the discussion we've had tonight, they are connecting the dots. They're like, okay, either I'm going through this, my child is going through this. So what would be the first step in terms of them now seeking the correct medical help, and also how can they join your association?
Okay. First, I want to just highlight a few things. One, that in Kenya we have a population of around 50 million now, estimate. So that means with a population of 50 million, we expect that we have around 5,000 guys. We've only been able to identify 650. That means majority of the hemophilia patients, we don't know them. They're out there suffering somewhere. And you probably, our viewers are actually the people who come into contact with them. They see them. This guy has, kila saa, he's limping. Every time he's cut, he bleeds longer than, the normal boys. Or in your family, you say you have people who are nose bleeding all the time. It's not normal for you to nose bleed all the time. For a lady, it's not normal that you have menstrual periods running for more than 5 days. So you may be a potential hemophilia patient. But how then do we get to assist you? The first thing is we have centers that have a capacity to diagnose whether you have hemophilia or not. We have one in Kenyatta National Hospital. We have one in Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital. We have another in Moranga. They can do a basic profile. And we have, of course, General Hospital. You can walk into those facilities and not request to go to the hemophilia clinic.
James, I'm curious, is there a way to identify somebody who is living with hemophilia as part of the organization? And I know internationally it's a practice with extreme conditions. Either you have to wear a band, carry a card of some sort.
Okay. For us, once you've gone through the stages, we've done the diagnosis, we are now putting you on treatment, and we've referred you to a specific clinic. We will also put you on our register as a patient, or sometimes we also include the parent as one of us. Then we'll issue with a card that looks like this. Our members are encouraged to carry this card, because then it actually gives you your member number, so that, because our register is online. If I go to a clinic, say in MTRH, all they need to do is feed this number to that register, and automatically my information comes up, populates, and the doctor is able to see, last week I was in Nairobi because I had a knee bleed. Today I'm here because I have an elbow bleed.
So they can see your entire medical history.
They can see my entire medical history. Then two, it also shows you my hemophilia type, so that in the event, assuming you're in an accident and you're not able to talk, they're able to know that because you're hemophilia A, they cannot give you a product meant for hemophilia B. Then it also tells you what is your blood group, assuming the factor concentrate is not available. And we need to give you blood. What is your blood type? So that, because the blood that, if you're AB, I cannot give you, there's a blood type that I may not give you. Then treatment, we also advise, what are the treatment options? We give you factor, that blood related, or cryoprecipitate. If and if factor 8 and cryoprecipitate are not available, then we can recommend for fresh frozen plasma. Then, more importantly, it also tells you who is the doctor to contact and what's their number. Then, over and above that, we also give the next of kin, so that you may not be able to talk. The doctor is unreachable. If we call your next of kin, they're able to say, James, actually, he's in an accident? Please give him factor 8. He'll be managed.
So if I had to ask everybody, Carlos, do you have your card?
Yeah, just to add on what James has actually said, we have this is a national card, but we also have a worldwide registry.
Right.
So just in case maybe once you are fed in our national registry, we have the worldwide registry too. So it also gives you an opportunity when you travel
globally.
Yeah, globally, and maybe you are you get these major bleeds, and so they actually also have the same. You have the number. And
so yours is the global one?
Yeah, I have the global, but I also have the
national one as well. So Maureen, do you have your card? Yeah. And Charles, you have your card? Yes. Anthony, do you have your card?
Yes.
Is your card with you right now?
No, I don't have it yet, but I have it.
This is what you are talking about,
This is what we are talking about. We encourage all our patients to walk around with their card, because you never know when an injury or an accident can happen and you're not able to talk. So the people who respond to your, to save you should actually be able to identify. But also, over and above the card, we also issue wristband. And I'm sure on this one he has one.
Which he has now.
This one, the red one also has, it's written, you are hemophilic. The people who are trained on paramedics, especially guys who work with ambulances, the guys who are, the nurses you see in an ambulance, in the event of an accident, they're able to isolate the reds and the greens. They know the red means danger, so they have to actually respond to you faster than the normal guys.
Okay, good to know. So Patricia, very quickly, maybe tell us, how do you raise more awareness about your condition?
So what you're currently doing, and it's now like about 1 year old, is raising awareness amongst the healthcare professionals through an association which I founded called Hereditary Angioedema Kenya. It is relatively new, and so we are getting ourselves into doctor seminars to try and raise awareness, because it's actually from a doctor's diagnostics that we're able to get a patient. Most patients who live with hereditary angioedema are normally misdiagnosed, especially with like allergies or food allergies or something that uses another different path, different from hereditary angioedema. So we have an association whereby we are actually carrying out recruitment for anybody who has angioedema sort of symptoms, and we actually have also put together some doctors who will be able to identify whether it's a hereditary angioedema or it's another kind of angioedema. Yes.
And maybe very quickly, Dr. Charles, when it comes to the angioedema, how common is it?
Okay, thank you. So as Patricia mentioned, there's a hereditary angioedema, and there are other types of angioedema which are much more common. So to simplify angioedema, angio means blood vessel, and edema means swelling. So what happens is your blood vessel actually releases fluid into tissues, and thereby you get swelling on the skin. So you'd find a markedly swollen lip, or you get swelling into a mucous membrane. And it could happen in the abdomen, it could happen in the chest, or worse still in the airway, which could actually threaten the life of the person suffering from it, because they could end up not breathing. And so when it comes to awareness, we always make sure that this type of swelling is understood. And what is very characteristic is that there's either a small trigger or no trigger at all of the swelling. As Patricia mentioned, when she washes clothes, then her hands would swell. Ideally, that should not happen. And what is very, very characteristic is that swelling is not itchy. Unlike other types of swellings, which, say, for example, if you eat food that you're allergic to, or you're stung by a bee or a wasp, you itch a lot. But in hereditary angioedema, you don't each. And the other types of angioedemas could be related to something that is happening in the body or an ingestion of, say, a medicine or food. And thereby we need to, as medical professionals, we need to make that distinction of the different types of angioedemas because they have their different treatments.
Okay, very quickly, let's take questions from the audience. We start from the back.
Yeah, I'm Clinton. So I was asking, like, if you have low blood pressure, does it mean that you have a problem with your blood, or you have hemophilia?
Okay,
Yeah.
I think maybe let me throw this to Dr. Julia.
Okay. For the question on low blood pressure and hemophilia, hemophilia is actually a bleeding disorder. So if you actually have massive bleeding, then you'll get low blood pressure. But low blood pressure technically is not hemophilia. I hope we've gotten the distinction. Yes, yes.
Okay, the other question?
Hello, my name is Batkan, and my question is that if, apart from genetical inheritance, is there any other way that this disease is transmitted from one person to another?
For hemophilia, the major is X, as Cargo had said, X chromosomally linked.
So it's genes?
It's genes. Mm-hmm. It's hereditary. But as we had earlier also alluded to, that sometimes it can occur what we call spontaneous mutations. Spontaneous mutations, that means your genes just go haywire. So you just get it, and if you look back through the family history, there's no one who has hemophilia. And a few of our patients, if you look through their family tree, actually no one has hemophilia. They have, like, there's a gentleman who has 6 brothers, a twin. He's the only one, even in other generations, with hemophilia. So those ones are what we call the spontaneous mutation in the X chromosome that is responsible for factor VIII production.
Right. I want to thank all my guests for coming on the show tonight. I hope that you learned something. Remember, tonight was all about raising awareness. Well, that's it from me, Tamima, and the rest of the crew. Until next time, good night.